Recreate yourself. They tell you to improve, to fix, to become a better version. But what if the version was never yours to begin with? What if you've spent years polishing a mask instead of building a soul? Have you ever felt like everything you do is just maintenance? Eat better, sleep more, think positive, and still you feel hollow. But what if you didn't have to fix anything? What if change didn't come from effort, but from stillness? This is where Stoicism begins, not with more doing, but with less noise, not with more goals, but with more truth. In a world obsessed with updates, recreation is a return, back to something deeper, back to something quieter, back to something that doesn't need to be seen, to be real. You're not here to fix, you're here to become. Before you begin, stop running. Have you ever felt like just one thing going wrong can tear the whole day apart? One small failure, one message left unread, one glance that didn't feel right, and suddenly you're drowning in a sea of emotions you thought you had already outgrown. You try to shake it off, to stay composed, to be okay, but deep down, you know this isn't just about today. It's about the version of you that keeps showing up but never feels like home. But what if, instead of being swept away by the chaos, you could stand still in the middle of it? This isn't about pretending to be strong. It's about building calm from the inside out. That's where Stoicism lives, in the still space between what happens and what you choose. Not to be cold, not to be numb, but to be clear. So before we go any further, do something simple but powerful. Go to the comments and write, "The control is within me." Not for likes, not for views, but for yourself. Because what you plant there will shape how you respond when the next storm comes. Write it, mean it, let it take root. Now let me tell you something. There was a young blacksmith. His name was Martin. He wasn't famous. He wasn't loud, but he was steady. Until one day, everything broke. His tools, his forge, his calm, his hands shook. His fire surged, and just when he was about to snap, he paused. He remembered what his grandfather once whispered, "The one who controls fire builds empires." So Martin didn't scream, didn't destroy. He rebuilt, one breath at a time. And when people asked how, he smiled and said, "The emotion is real, but it doesn't own me." That's where we begin, not with motivation, but with mastery. Now take a breath, because what comes next might change you. Let's start. Lesson 1. Stop fixing. Start recreating why fixing doesn't work. Everyone's trying to fix something, their body, their mind, their life. Wake up earlier, eat cleaner, think better, be more. You keep patching, hacking, repairing. But what if the problem was never the cracks? What if the problem was the wall itself? We're taught to fix. From the outside in, paint it pretty, call it progress. But here's the truth. You can't fix a life you didn't choose. You can't keep healing a self that was never honest in the first place. Fixing is comfortable, safe, familiar. It tells you, just improve this one thing and everything else will fall into place. And it never does, because fixing is a loop, a trap disguised as growth. It keeps you busy, but never free. And maybe that's why you're tired. Not because you're broken, but because you're exhausted from trying to repair a version of yourself that was built for approval, not for peace. You don't need better goals. You need deeper questions. Who told you what success looks like? Who taught you that silence means weakness? Who made you believe you needed to be anything other than whole? This isn't about fixing. This is about returning to something older than ambition, to something quieter than hustle. You don't need to become a better version. You need to become a true one. Because the truth is simple. You can't keep repainting the mask and calling it healing. Sometimes you need to break the mirror, not to see less of yourself, but to finally see what's real. Rebuild from identity, not habits. You keep trying to build a new life with the same old blueprint. New habits, new systems, new routines. But if the person underneath still sees themselves as small, nothing will last, because habits don't hold you up. Identity does. That's why people relapse. That's why they burn out. That's why the 5 a.m. alarms stop working after a few cold mornings. The habit was there, but the belief was missing. You can't build consistency on a foundation of doubt. You can't chase discipline if you still see yourself as someone who gives up. You're not lazy, you're not weak. You've just been trying to build without roots. So stop asking, what should I do next? Start asking, who do I need to become? So this becomes natural. The Stoics didn't chase hacks, they chased honor. They built character so strong that habits became a shadow of who they already were. Their choices weren't tricks, they were testaments. Wake early, train your body, practice stillness, not because a checklist told you to, but because your identity couldn't imagine anything less. That's the shift, not new habits, but a new self that makes old limits impossible. When you become someone new, what used to be hard becomes who you are. Not discipline, but nature. That's how change sticks. Not with effort, but with alignment. You can't rebrand what you haven't burned. You change your room, change your wallpaper, change your bio, but underneath it all, it's still you. The same fears, the same silence, the same ache that doesn't leave, just because the packaging changed. That's what no one tells you. Rebranding is not recreating. Rebranding is image. Recreating is identity. You can fake a glow-up. You can fake confidence. You can fake moving on. But deep down, your nervous system still flinches at the same memories. Your mind still replays the same loops when the lights go off. You're not fooling life. You're only pausing the confrontation because you can't trick your way into becoming. You can't out-design the things you never dissolved. You can't keep dressing up fear and calling it reinvention. To remake yourself, you don't need new colors. You need a fire big enough to melt what's false. A self built for applause can never carry peace. So stop asking, do I look different? Start asking, do I feel free? Because no one can rebrand what they haven't faced. No one can carry their truth while still dragging their mask. If you're still trying to impress them, you're not recreating, you're performing. If you're still afraid to be alone, you're not building a new you, you're just building distraction. So burn what's not real, even if it looked pretty, even if it got you praise, because peace has never cared about how things look, only about how much of you still knows what's true. When you remake from truth, you don't have to sell it, you just become it. There's a stillness before something breaks. Not everything breaks with a sound. Sometimes it's the silence that tells you everything. The pause before a decision. The moment when the noise stops, but the pressure rises. And in that space, that unbearable stillness, something is waiting to shift. Not because you planned it, not because you forced it, but because the life you've been holding on to has quietly expired. You can feel it in the way your breath catches when nothing even happened. In the way the things you used to enjoy feel heavy now. In the way your smile takes longer to return, each time it fades. This is the void, not chaos, not fire, not breakdown, just the space between who you were. Sometimes it's the silence that tells you everything, the pause before a decision, the moment when the noise stops. But the pressure rises, and in that space, that unbearable stillness, something is waiting to shift. Not because you planned it, not because you forced it, but because the life you've been holding on to has quietly expired. You can feel it, in the way your breath catches when nothing even happened. In the way the things you used to enjoy feel heavy now. In the way your smile takes longer to return, each time it fades. This is the void, not chaos, not fire, not breakdown, just the space between who you were and who you're becoming. And most people run from it. They fill it with noise, with goals, with busyness that looks like purpose. But the shift doesn't come when you distract yourself. It comes when you finally sit in it, uncomfortable, still, present. You start to see things, the habits you've outgrown, the friendships that echo, the beliefs that never fit, and suddenly what you thought you needed feels like a cage. The path you were walking doesn't call your name anymore. And here's the truth. Change doesn't always arrive with a scream. Sometimes it walks in quietly and just stares at you until you're ready to say, enough. That's the moment. Everything begins, not when you fight, but when you listen. Stillness is not weakness. It's the audition for your next self. So don't rush out of it. Don't numb it. Sit there, breathe there, because in the stillness, your future is waiting. What the Stoics did before change. The Stoics didn't rush to fix. They paused and looked inward. Before Marcus Aurelius gave orders, he gave himself silence. Before Epictetus taught others, he mastered himself. And before any action, there was always reflection. Not emotion, not pressure, not noise, because they knew reaction is fast, but wisdom is still. In a world obsessed with movement, they practiced immobility. Not laziness, not avoidance, but the ability to sit with themselves until the fog cleared. They wrote not to show off, but to see themselves. They questioned their fears. They dissected their thoughts. They measured their anger before it became damage. They didn't ask, what should I do next? They asked, what am I clinging to that no longer serves me? This is what we miss today. We skip the pause. We fear the stillness. We chase dopamine and call it drive. But change that lasts comes slowly, silently, sacredly. And the Stoics knew if you don't pause before the pivot, you'll repeat the same cycle in a different disguise. So they burned not just desires, but illusions. They gave up comfort to gain clarity. They walked away from easy, to walk toward true. And maybe that's what you need too. Not another plan, not another push, but a moment to ask yourself, what am I becoming when no one is watching? Because the version of you that will last is the one built in private. The Stoics didn't wait for a new year. They created new selves in every moment of awareness. And that's where your power lives too. Not in noise, but in the decision to sit still long enough to become real. Lesson 2. The art of not caring about everything, is a fast way to lose yourself. You're not supposed to care about everything, not every opinion, not every signal, not every voice that pulls at your peace. But somewhere along the way, we started believing that caring equaled character. That if we didn't react, didn't respond, didn't show concern, we were cold. So we stretched ourselves thin in the name of kindness. We said yes when we were breaking. We showed up when we had nothing left. We gave pieces of our soul just to seem present. But here's the truth. Caring too much about the wrong things will drown you. You'll feel everything and still understand nothing. You'll keep absorbing what was never yours to carry, and it will blur your sense of self until you forget what actually matters. This isn't stoicism as numbness. This is stoicism as selection. The Stoics didn't avoid emotions. They filtered them. They didn't scream because not everything deserved an echo. They didn't chase applause because not every voice needed to be believed. They knew every reaction is a transaction, and not everything is worth the cost. In a world that wants your attention, your urgency, your outrage, the real rebellion is calm. The real strength is selectivity. So ask yourself, are you carrying this because it's yours, or because someone told you a good person would? Because the ones who care for everything lose themselves fastest. And the ones who choose carefully, those are the ones who stay whole. Stop caring to be liked. Start caring to stay alive. Not everything deserves your fire. Some things were never meant to be your fight. The world throws noise. People throw shade. Life throws uncertainty, but none of it can touch you unless you open the door. The Stoics drew a line between what they controlled and what they released. It wasn't apathy, it was precision. They didn't suppress emotion. They mastered focus. Because chaos is loud, but control is quiet. You feel attacked, but it's not personal. It's projection. You feel judged, but they don't see you. They see themselves. You feel behind, but it's not your race. It's someone else's highlight reel. So what do? You draw the line. This is mine to carry. This is not. This needs my energy. This does not. Not out of coldness, but out of clarity. Because if you don't protect your peace, it gets auctioned off to every distraction with a loud enough voice. Control is not control over others. It's control over yourself, your responses, your attention, your emotional budget. You can't win every argument. You can't answer every insult. You can't save everyone. And the moment you try, you lose yourself. So pause, breathe, zoom out if this isn't yours. Let it go. The Stoic split isn't about being above things. It's about knowing what's worth descending for. Most fires die when you stop giving them oxygen, and most peace begins when you stop feeding what was never meant to grow. When the world owns how you feel, you stop being you. What if most of your emotions aren't even yours? What if the guilt you carry every night, the pressure in your chest, the shame you never speak out loud, was planted there by systems, by screens, by stories that profit when you feel small? We live in a world where fear is monetized and approval is sold like a drug. You're told who to be, what to want, what to hate, what to hide. And if you fall in line, you belong. If not, you break. So you learn to adapt, to people please, to overthink, to react before feeling, and somewhere along the way, your emotions stop being signals and start becoming cages. That's why the Stoics were so radical. They didn't just question society, they questioned themselves. They asked, why do I want this? Whose voice is that? Would I still feel this if no one was watching? Because they understood. Freedom isn't doing what you want. Freedom is feeling what's true when no one's looking. If your joy only exists when it's posted. If your anger is just recycled outrage. If your goals sound like slogans, then maybe you don't need motivation, you need detox. Society wants to program your inner world, but Stoicism teaches you to own it, to filter the noise, to rebuild your center, to feel without being LED. You weren't born to echo. You were born to choose. So stop giving your emotions to algorithms. Stop selling your peace for belonging and start asking, is this mine or was this installed? Because the moment you reclaim your emotions, you reclaim yourself. Drop what doesn't move the soul. Not everything deserves to stay with you. Not every story, not every voice, not every obligation that clings like a shadow but brings no light. Some things were meant to pass through you, not stay in you, but you kept them anyway. Because you thought letting go meant failure. You thought release meant you didn't care. So you held it. The friendship that expired, the dream that died quietly, the guilt you never earned, and it weighed more than you were ever meant to carry. Here's what the Stoics knew: you aren't meant to hold everything. You are meant to hold truth and let the rest fall. Letting go is not weakness, it's alignment. It's the strength to say, this doesn't move me anymore. This doesn't belong to my next chapter. You don't need permission. You don't need closure. You don't need everyone to understand. You just need a quiet knowing and the courage to walk, not run, not escape, not fight, just walk. Away from what doesn't inspire, what doesn't challenge, what doesn't elevate. If it drains your soul but fills your schedule, let it go. If it looks good on paper but feels empty in your chest, let it go, because your soul was never meant to settle. Life isn't about holding on, it's about holding true. So take one last look and drop it, because when you walk lighter, you rise. Lesson 3, burn the old script. If you want to change your life, you have to set fire to the script. You can't step into a new life while still rehearsing the old one. Most people don't fail to change because they lack discipline. They fail because they refuse to let goof the script. The story they tell themselves, the roles they think they have to play, the lines they keep repeating, even when the scene is over. You've been cast in a version of you that no longer fits, but you keep reading the lines, you keep showing up to a story that drained you. Because it's familiar, because it got applause once, because it feels safer to repeat than to release. But here's the truth. Change costs something. If you want a new self, you have to sacrifice the one that was built to survive instead of live. And that means burning the script, the one that told you to shrink, to please, to always be okay. The one that taught you to stay small so others could stay comfortable. The one that made you feel guilty for wanting more. You can't rewrite your life with old lines still on your lips. So let them go. The expectations, the fake smiles, the roles you never auditioned for but still performed. Because you were not born to perform. You were born to become. Recreation is not renovation. It's destruction followed by rebirth. This is not about becoming better. It's about becoming true. And to do that, you have to walk into the fire, not to suffer, but to strip away everything that was scripted by fear. So ask yourself, what part of me am I still acting out just to feel accepted? And then watch it burn. Because only in the ashes can something honest begin. Nietzsche's fire wasn't metaphor. It was a mirror. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." He wasn't romanticizing the storm. He was pointing at the fire you try to hide, the anger, the shame, the wild hunger for something more, not to be numbed, but to be used. Because fire doesn't just burn, it forges. And Nietzsche knew you can't escape your shadow. You have to integrate it. We spend years trying to be better, kinder, quieter, more polite, but deep down we're still igniting. And if you don't own that fire, it owns you. So instead of suppressing it, the wise let it transform them. They feed it truth. They give it a direction. They burn what no longer serves and let that flame make them real. You want to change? Then don't fear your chaos. Stare into it. Ask it, what are you trying to teach me? What part of me have I buried just to feel safe? Because under every mask is a suppressed flame waiting to be reclaimed. This is the part of you that remembers you're alive, not managed, not polished, alive, and yes, it's messy, it's loud, it doesn't care if the world claps, but it's true, and truth doesn't come from balance, it comes from bravery. Nietzsche didn't want you to be comfortable, he wanted you to be honest. He wanted you to let the fire strip away who you were told to be, so what's left is who you actually are, not perfect, not pretty, but free. So feed your fire, not with rage, but with direction. Let it burn what's false and become what's clear. Sartre said we're condemned to be free, and that terrifies people. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that freedom isn't a gift, it's a burden, because when you realize you're free, you also realize you're responsible. There's no one to blame, no map to follow, no destiny waiting, just choice, moment by moment. And that's terrifying, because most people don't want freedom. They want permission. They want the universe to tell them who to be. They want signs, guarantees, excuses. But Sartre said, you are the author, and the page is always blank. So what are you writing? Are you repeating lines handed down by fear, or are you finally choosing with your own voice? See, we all say we want change, but real change means accountability. It means asking, what part of this life is still my choice? The relationship that drains you, the job that numbs you, the habits that hollow you out. They might have happened to you, but they're continued by you. That's not judgment, that's power. Because if you're the problem, you're also the key. Sartre called it anguish. That feeling when you realize you can shape your life, but you also can't blame anyone if you don't. The Stoics agreed. They taught that you can't control the world, but you can control the narrative you live by. And once you own that, Once you stop pointing outward, you start creating inward, not out of pressure, but out of possibility. You stop waiting for permission and you start asking, if no one told me who to be, what would I become? That's the fire. That's the weight. That's the beginning. Freedom isn't light, but it's yours. Identity isn't a brand, it's an anchor. You weren't born to be a brand. You weren't meant to package your personality, curate your thoughts, or polish your life for display. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being a person and started becoming a presentation. You crafted a look, a label, a list of things to say and not say just to stay on message. And the worst part, it worked. You got the approval, the applause, the validation, but it came at a price, because every time you showed up as the version they liked more, you disappeared a little. That's how identity becomes a brand, when it's no longer a reflection of self, but a performance for others. And the truth is, a brand can't heal, a brand can't rest, a brand can't break, it can only maintain. But you're not here to maintain. You're here to evolve, and evolution requires risk, conflict, uncertainty. The parts of you that will grow can't be filtered, can't be marketable, can't be liked by everyone, but they will be true. So stop asking, what image am I building? Start asking, what truth am I betraying to keep this image alive? Because you weren't meant to impress the room. You were meant to be whole, even when no one claps. That's what the Stoics practiced. Not image, integrity, not style, substance. They didn't ask the world, do you accept me? They asked themselves, am I in alignment when no one's watching? Because real identity isn't loud, it's grounded. It doesn't shift to please, it doesn't vanish in silence, it stays, even when the lights go off, even when no one remembers your name, even when the brand is gone. You remain. What if nothing changes? Except you. What if the world never gives you a sign? No permission, no clear moment, no applause for your effort. What if your life stays messy, no matter how much you meditate? What if people still misunderstand you, even after all your growth? Would you still change? That's the real test. Not whether the world shifts, but whether you do. Because sometimes the world doesn't change, the people stay the same. The chaos still surrounds you, the triggers don't disappear, but you don't react the same. You get quieter, you choose slower, you walk with clarity instead of rage. And that's what makes the difference. Not the job, not the city, not the timing, but the internal shift that no one claps for. That's the one that matters. See, we keep waiting for conditions to align. We wait for peace before becoming peaceful. Wait for love before becoming whole. Wait for a break before letting go. But what if you went first? What if you chose clarity without confirmation, chose purpose without proof? Would that still be enough? The Stoics would say yes, because they didn't live for control. They lived for alignment. They didn't ask life to change. They asked themselves to rise above it. And maybe that's your next step too, not to wait, not to wish, but to say, I'll move first and trust the world to catch up. Because real change isn't something you witness, it's something you become, even if no one sees it, even if nothing else changes. Because if you shift, everything feels different. And maybe that's enough. Lesson 4. Find your North Star. You don't need a life plan, you need a direction. Everyone tells you to find your purpose, as if it's hiding somewhere, behind the next book, the next podcast, the next rock you haven't flipped yet. Like purpose is a prize, a treasure, a sentence you'll one day write down, and everything will finally make sense. But here's the truth. Purpose isn't found, it's built. And most people don't build it, they perform it. They pick a label, a title, a career path that looks meaningful on paper, but inside it's hollow, because they weren't searching for meaning, they were searching for certainty. It's easier to commit to a script than to sit in the silence of not knowing. So we choose fast. We brand ourselves. We say, "This is who I am," and the world claps, but deep down, we wonder, is this it? Purpose becomes a costume, not a compass, but the Stoics. They didn't chase purpose like a destination. They lived by direction. They asked, what kind of person do I want to become? And let that shape everything else. They didn't need the map, they just needed the star. Because once you know the direction, you don't need to see every step. You just need to keep walking. And that's the secret. Purpose doesn't start with answers. It starts with movement, with action that feels aligned, with choices that echo your inner voice. Not someone else's script, not society's checklist. You don't need to know exactly why. You just need to be honest about what feels true. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to move in the direction that makes you feel most alive. And the rest, it builds itself, step by step, choice by choice. Until one day, you look back and realize you became the purpose you were looking for. You don't find meaning, you create it. Everyone's looking for something to believe in, a mission, a calling, a reason to wake up when everything feels heavy. But here's what they don't tell you. Meaning isn't found. It's made. It doesn't arrive in a dream. It doesn't fall from the sky. It doesn't knock politely and say, "Here I am." Meaning is something you build with your hands, your time, your pain, your choices. It's not assigned, it's created. And creation is messy. It doesn't come with clarity. It comes with confusion, discomfort, doubt. But when you show up anyway, when you do the work without applause, without certainty, that's when meaning begins to form. Most people wait to feel inspired before they start. The Stoics did the opposite. They started and meaning followed. They didn't say, "What's my purpose?" They said, "What can I do that aligns with my values today?" No fanfare, no pressure, just quiet alignment in motion, because the truth is, you won't find meaning on the sidelines. You find it in the making, in the trial, in the effort that feels invisible until it's not. You build it when you say yes to what matters and no to what doesn't. And slowly, you realize this life isn't something to decipher. It's something to shape. Like clay, like a fire, like a long walk in the dark where every step becomes the path. So stop waiting for the reason, become the reason, because meaning doesn't belong to the chosen or the lucky or the perfect. It belongs to those who show up even when it's unclear, even when it's hard, even when no one else understands, because eventually meaning doesn't find you. You find yourself in what you've built. The compass is inside, not out there. The world loves to tell you who to be. From the moment you open your eyes, you're fed a script. Be successful, be nice, be productive, be admired, and if you follow it, they clap, they smile, they nod, they say, "You're doing great." But here's the question, who's defining great? Because applause is addictive, and if you're not, careful, you'll spend your whole life chasing a round of applause that never comes from within. This is why so many people feel lost, even when they've made it, because they followed the map, but never built a compass. They checked every box, but ignored their inner voice. And now they're exhausted, confused, performing. You weren't meant to perform. You were meant to align, and alignment starts when you stop asking, "What do they want from me?" and start asking, "What feels honest to me?" The Stoics didn't chase status, they chased stability, not the kind that comes from praise, but the kind that comes from walking a path you don't have to justify to anyone. Because when your compass is internal, you move differently, you speak less, you listen more, you leave when it no longer fits instead of begging to stay liked. Outer applause is loud, but inner peace is louder in the long run. So let the world be confused. Let them misread you. Let them ask why you stopped showing up to places that drained your spirit. You don't owe them answers. You owe yourself honest direction. And once you find that, the noise fades, the pressure lifts, and the North Star you've been looking for was always inside. There's joy in not knowing. There's freedom in uncertainty. Everyone's chasing certainty. They want the 5-year plan, the checklist, the exact formula for peace, success, love. But here's the truth. Life doesn't owe you certainty. And the ones who demand it, they suffer most. Because when uncertainty shows up, and it always does, they panic, they grip tighter, they resist, they fall apart because they built their identity on control. But what if uncertainty isn't the enemy? What if not knowing is the greatest gift? The Stoics understood this. They didn't try to predict the future. They prepared their souls for it. They knew peace doesn't come from knowing what's next. It comes from trusting yourself when it comes, not because you're ready, but because you're rooted. That's where joy lives, not in the perfect plan, but in the quiet confidence that whatever happens, you won't lose yourself. Existential joy isn't loud. It doesn't look like hype. It's not a motivational speech. It's the whisper inside that says, even if everything falls apart, I'll be okay. And because you've practiced letting go, because you've made peace with the unknown, because you've stopped expecting life to behave like a spreadsheet. You don't need all the answers. You just need a strong enough center to move without them. Uncertainty isn't a void, it's a canvas, a space to grow, to experiment, to become. And in that space, if you stop grasping, you might just feel something deeper than control. You might feel alive, not because you know what's next, but because you're present enough to meet it as you are. And that is the kind of joy no plan can touch. Lesson 5. Radical self-respect. Self-respect isn't selfish. It's survival. We're taught to be nice, to be agreeable, to not upset anyone, to stay soft even when we're bleeding. And somewhere along the way, we confused kindness with self-erasure. We learned to let things slide, to laugh things off, to carry what wasn't ours just to keep the peace. But here's the truth. Peace built on silence isn't peace, it's pressure. And one day, you wake up resentful, burned, out and so far from yourself you don't even recognize your own yes anymore. That's why the Stoics didn't preach endless tolerance. They practiced boundaries, not out of ego, but out of respect. They knew that a life without edges becomes a life without self. Because if you say yes to everything, you're saying no to yourself. If you always make space for others, you start shrinking in your own story. And here's what they understood deeply. Boundaries aren't rude, they're real. They're the lines that say, this is what I allow, this is what I don't. Not to control others, but to protect your center. So why are we afraid to set them? Because we were trained to choose being liked over being whole. But what good is approval if it costs your integrity? What good is harmony if it silences your truth? The Stoics would say, respect is not earned by shrinking, it's earned by standing. Even if your voice shakes, even if they don't understand, even if you lose people who only loved your compliance. Radical self-respect means losing what was built in your silence. And yes, it's scary. But on the other side, clarity, energy, truth. You stop bending, you stop breaking, you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You draw the line, and then you live inside it. Not smaller, stronger. You can love them and still leave. The hardest decision isn't between right and wrong. It's between love and self, between staying silent to keep them close or speaking truth and risking distance. Most people choose silence. They convince themselves, if I just try harder, if I just love deeper, if I just hold it in a little longer, maybe it won't hurt. Maybe they'll change. Maybe things will go back to how they once were. But here's the truth. You can love someone and still know they're not safe for your soul. You can honor the memories, the laughs, the soft parts that once fit, and still recognize that the current version of this connection is costing you too much. The Stoics never taught indifference. They taught discernment. They didn't say detach from love. They said don't lose yourself inside it. Because real love doesn't ask you to abandon your needs. It doesn't ask you to betray your intuition. It doesn't force you to swallow your pain just to protect their comfort. That's not love. That's sacrifice without return. That's slow disappearance. And if you stay long enough, you start forgetting what your voice sounds like. That's why walking away isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's the loudest form of self-respect. You can love them deeply, honestly, and still know. My peace is not a negotiable price. Letting go doesn't erase the bond. It just reclaims the boundary. It says, I choose me, not because I hate you, but because I finally remembered I'm allowed to. And when you do that, when you stand in that silence, without guilt, without bending, you don't just leave them, you come back to yourself. You broke your own heart to protect theirs. We call it kindness, but sometimes it's just self-betrayal. You let it slide again and again. You swallowed your voice so they wouldn't raise theirs. You dimmed your light so they wouldn't feel small. You carried the weight so they could walk free. And the world called you strong, loyal, good. But inside, you were crumbling, not because they broke you, but because you did. You broke your own heart to protect theirs. That's the part no one talks about. How easy it is to confuse sacrifice with love. How quick we are to turn our boundaries into gifts for people who never asked how much it cost us. But kindness without self-respect is not love. It's abandonment. The Stoics saw this clearly. They didn't just speak about reason, they spoke about honor. And there is no honor in betraying yourself just to keep someone comfortable. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say, this hurts me too much to continue. That's not cruelty, that's truth. Because the moment you start bending to preserve something broken, you're not saving it. You're just delaying the reckoning, and reckoning always comes. So ask yourself, how many times have I told myself, I'm okay when I wasn't, just to keep them staying? If the answer is too many, it's time to come home. Not with rage, not with regret, with responsibility. Because your heart isn't a battlefield, it's a compass. And when you follow it back to yourself, that's where healing starts. You are not hard to love, just hard to use. Maybe the problem wasn't that you're too much. Too sensitive, too intense, too independent, too aware. Maybe the problem was that you saw through things too fast. You felt things too deep. You noticed patterns others wanted to ignore, and that scared them because people don't fear the loud, they fear the clear. And you were clear about what you needed, about what felt off, about where you wouldn't shrink anymore, so they told you you were difficult, dramatic, too much. But here's the truth. You were never hard to love. You were just hard to use. And people who benefit from your silence will always call your boundaries attitude. They'll shame your no. They'll test your yes. They'll call your clarity a threat. Because they weren't looking for a partner. They were looking for a participant in their comfort zone. But you didn't fit. You asked too many questions. You wanted too much truth, and that's exactly why you have to keep going. You're not too much. You're just not made for shallow. And the ones who can meet you there, they won't ask you to dim. They won't punish your truth. They won't flinch when you show your fullness. So stop apologizing for the way you feel, the way you notice, the way you stand. It's not too much. It's who you are when you're finally not afraid. Remember, the people who love you will never require your abandonment. So let the others fall away. Let the noise fade. You were never here to be easy. You were here to be real. You don't find your worth, you remember it. Your worth was never lost. It didn't vanish when they left. It didn't shrink when they criticized you. It didn't dissolve in the moments you broke down alone. It was always there, quiet, steady, waiting to be remembered, but the world teaches you to forget, to trade your value for validation, to seek permission before believing in yourself, to wait for someone else to tell you you're enough. And every time you do, you move one step further from your own center, until one day, you don't recognize your reflection, you don't trust your voice, you don't feel safe inside your own skin. That's not because you're broken, it's because you've been too loud with everyone else's voice, and too quiet with your own. So no, you don't need to find your worth. You need to sit still enough to hear it again. The Stoics didn't seek praise, they sought clarity. They didn't ask, "Am I worthy?" They acted in alignment with who they already were. Because real worth is not up for negotiation. It's not based on your output, your looks, your like count, your past. It's based on existence. You're here, you breathe, you feel, you choose, and that's enough. So if the world made you forget, make this the moment you remember. Not with a scream, not with a post, not with some perfect comeback, just a whisper inside. I was never less, I was just quiet. And now you get to turn up the volume, not to convince them, but to come back to you, because self-respect isn't a trait you earn. It's a truth you come home to. Lesson 6. The discipline of emotional control. Power isn't in expression, it's in restraint. Anyone can react, but not everyone can sit with it. The frustration, the sting, the weight of being misunderstood, it rises fast. It wants release. It wants a fight. But here's what the Stoics knew. Real strength is what you don't say. Not because you're afraid, not because you're weak, but because you've trained yourself to choose response over reaction in a world that glorifies instant opinions, loud takes, and emotional outbursts. Stoicism teaches the opposite. It teaches pause, observe, decide, because not every emotion deserves your voice. Some just need to be felt, examined, then released in silence. You don't owe the world an explanation for every shift in your chest. You owe yourself a moment of clarity before the next move. That's discipline, that's power. It's not in the post or the clapback or the perfectly timed reaction. It's in the restraint, the stillness, the sacred space between trigger and response, where your true self gets to choose. The Stoics didn't suppress emotion. They transcended it by learning to sit with it without being enslaved by it. They didn't avoid the heat. They stood inside it without burning others. And that's a different kind of fire. One that doesn't consume, one that purifies. So next time you feel it rise, the anger, the urge, the bite in your tongue, let it teach you something, because maybe the lesson isn't in the reaction. Maybe it's in the quiet, after you choose not to. And in that quiet, you find your edge. Not the edge that cuts, the edge that holds. You can't control the world, only your lens. Everything around you is outside your control. The economy, the weather, the words someone speaks in a moment of weakness. You can try to fix it. You can try to fight it. But you'll burn out long before the world bends to your will. That's why the Stoics never wasted time chasing control. They chased clarity. Because real power isn't about controlling outcomes. It's about mastering your response. That's where peace begins. Not when everything calms down, but when you do. You can't stop the storm, but you can learn how to stand inside it without falling apart. That's not detachment, that's discipline, the kind that comes when you shift your question from "why is this happening to me?" to "how do I want to show up inside this?" That's where transformation begins, when you stop trying to bend the world to your comfort and instead build a self that can hold discomfort without breaking. That's what the Stoics trained for. Not control over fate, but control over focus. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, he wasn't controlling Rome. He was controlling himself, his thoughts, his triggers, his choices, and from that inner mastery, he ruled everything else with poise. You don't need the world to calm down. You need to find the place inside you that already has. That's where your strength lives. Not in the outcome, not in applause, not in avoiding emotion, but in the small, quiet choice to hold your lens steady when everything else is shaking. Because when you own your lens, the world can't own your peace. Udrain, feeling isn't weakness, but misusing it is. Your emotions aren't the enemy. They're not a flaw. They're not a failure. They're not something to hide or fix. They're signals, not sentences. You feel rage, it's pointing to a boundary crossed. You feel sadness, it's revealing something meaningful was lost. You feel envy, it's whispering what you secretly long for. Every emotion is a message, but messages aren't meant to drive. That's where most people lose themselves. They let their emotions dictate their direction. Instead of inform their awareness, they feel something and immediately act, say something, post something, burn a bridge they later regret. But the Stoics, they created a gap between emotion and expression, between sensation and story. They didn't suppress their feelings. They separated them from their decisions. That's the difference. That's the power, not feeling less, but being less. So when anger rises, you pause. When fear kicks in, you assess. When excitement pulls you fast, you ask, is this me or just momentum? Because emotions are data, but not all data is actionable. Sometimes what you feel just needs to be held, witnessed, processed, not posted, not projected, not weaponized. And the more you build that gap, that pause, that sacred second before you move, the more you begin to own your emotional world instead of be owned by it. So no, feeling deeply isn't weakness, reacting blindly is. And when you lead with that clarity, the world doesn't get a version of you that's reacting. They get a version that's rooted. And that version moves differently, with intention, with gravity, with peace. Let it hit you, but don't let it enter you. Life will hit you. Words, looks, moments you didn't ask for, they come fast, unfiltered, and most of the time, they're not fair. But here's what the Stoics mastered. Just because it hits you doesn't mean it has to stay. You can feel the impact without inviting it to stay. You can notice the emotion without letting it build a home inside you. That's the Stoic shield, not to deflect, but to decide what enters, what shapes you, what echoes inside long after the moment has passed. Because most suffering doesn't come from what was said, it comes from what we let stick, the insult we keep replaying, the look we turned into a story. The silence we interpreted as rejection, but none of that is truth. It's just residue, unfiltered input we never cleared out. And over time, that residue becomes identity, unless you intervene. So what do the Stoics do? They filter, they pause after the blow, they sit with the sting, and they ask, is this mine or just something I caught? And if the answer is, it doesn't align with my values, it doesn't reflect my truth, then they drop it right there, right then. No carrying, no spiraling, no turning pain into personality, because your mind is a home, and not every guest gets to stay. Let them be confused. Let them be wrong about you. Let them throw shade in the dark. You choose what stays in your light. That's not cold. That's clarity. That's not numbness. That's maturity. And when you live like that, when your boundaries extend into your emotional space, you become unshakable. Not because nothing touches you, but because nothing enters without your consent. Calm isn't passivity, it's precision. Calm isn't a personality trait. It's not something you either have or don't. It's not about being chill. It's not about being unbothered. It's not about pretending things don't matter. Calm is a decision, a practiced stillness, a sharpened restraint, a sacred pause in a world addicted to reaction. And here's what most people miss. Calm isn't weakness, it's a skill. And like any skill, it gets stronger the more you choose it when it's hardest to. The Stoics didn't stay calm because they were indifferent. They stayed calm because they were prepared. prepared to be insulted, to be misunderstood, to be disappointed, and instead of flinching, they responded with clarity. Not silence from suppression, but silence from strength. Because when you don't need to prove, when you don't need to react, when you don't need to win, you've already won something deeper. Peace, agency, power. In a loud world, calm is radical. When everyone's spiraling, you breathe. When everyone's shouting, you observe. When everyone's rushing, you stand, not because you don't care, but because you've decided how much energy is worth giving. And that's what Stoicism is, not coldness, but control. The ability to feel fully without being hijacked, to move from center instead of chaos, to remain grounded while everything else trembles. Calm isn't a mood, it's a muscle, and every time you choose it, especially when it's hardest, you get stronger. Not louder, not flashier, but deeper, clearer, unshakable. The calmest person in the room is the one who's already won the war within. Lesson 7. The Stoic way of building self-belief. You don't need more confidence. You need fewer lies. Most people don't lack confidence. They lack silence. Too many voices, too many opinions, too many shoulds wrapped in false concern. You scroll, you compare, you shrink, and you wonder why belief feels so far away. But here's the truth. You don't need to feel bigger. You need to feel quieter. Why? Because your doubt, it's not coming from truth, it's coming from noise. Noise that says you need to be more, do more, prove more, to be worthy of your own respect. But the Stoics didn't build belief by shouting affirmations in the mirror. They built it by returning to center. They didn't feed ego, they cut distractions. They simplified their inner world until what remained was true. And in that truth, they stood, not because they were loud, but because they were clear. So maybe your problem isn't that you're not confident. Maybe you've just let too many unqualified voices into your head. And the cure isn't hype, it's honesty. What are you really afraid of? Whose approval are you still chasing? What story are you repeating that doesn't even belong to you? Cut the noise. Confidence isn't found in a motivational quote. It's found in consistency. When you do what you said you would, in silence, without praise, without proof. Every time you show up when it's hard, every time you keep your word when no one's watching, every time you stop performing and start aligning, you build belief, not from noise, but from depth, from discipline, from integrity. So stop asking for more confidence, start removing what's in the way of it. Because when you subtract the noise, what's left is enough. A belief isn't a feeling, it's proof stacked over time. Confidence isn't an affirmation. It's not something you yell into the mirror and suddenly believe. It's not a mood, not a mantra, not a moment of hype that makes the fear disappear. Confidence is built, not felt, and it's built one way. Proof. Not praise, not applause, not followers, not likes, just proof. Stacked quietly, over time. You show up when it's hard, you follow through when it's boring, you keep going when no one claps. And suddenly, you start to believe. Because belief doesn't come from what others say about you, it comes from what you consistently do when no one's watching. The Stoics lived this. They didn't chase motivation, they trained movement. They built character by keeping promises to themselves. Small ones, private ones, and every time they kept their word, the voice inside grew quieter. The doubt shrunk, the noise faded, and belief grew. That's the difference between praise and proof. Praise comes from others. It's external, and it fades. But proof stays. Proof says, I've done this before, I can do it again. It doesn't need validation, it doesn't beg to be seen, it doesn't fall apart under pressure, it stands, because when you've built belief on evidence instead of emotion, you move different. You don't need to feel ready, you are ready. So stop waiting to feel confident, start stacking proof until confidence becomes inevitable, because once you've built it, no one can give it to you and no one can take it away. Confidence isn't who you are, it's what you keep doing. People think confidence is a personality trait, that some people are just born with it, that it's tied to how you talk, how you look, how many people listen when you speak. But the Stoics saw it differently. They didn't chase charisma. They practiced character. And character isn't something you find, it's something you build. Brick by brick, act by act. Because confidence isn't who you are. It's what you repeatedly do when no one is watching. You become disciplined, you build trust. You stay consistent, you build credibility, you walk your values even when it's quiet. You build a self that doesn't shake, and over time you no longer need to believe in yourself. You just become someone worth trusting, not in theory, in habit, in action, in proof. It's not a vibe, it's a verb. So stop asking, how do I get more confident? Start asking, what am I consistently doing that earns my own trust? Because confidence isn't a mask, it's a mirror. And if you don't like what you see, you don't fix the mirror. You fix the repetition. You change the inputs. You change the patterns. You change the story you're writing through action. And that's how belief grows. Not with force, but with follow-through. Not with a big moment, but with small ones, stacked daily. You become what you repeat, so repeat alignment, repeat honesty, repeat strength even when it shakes, and one day, without even realizing it. Confidence won't be something you seek, it will be something you are. Self-doubt isn't truth. It's a memory you forgot to delete. You don't lack value, you carry old code. Voices that told you not enough, moments that planted shame, rooms that made you feel invisible. And even though they're over, their echoes stay loud. Because the mind doesn't just remember, it replays. It replays your mistakes, your worst moments, your most fragile versions. And that loop, it becomes your script, the one that says, you're an imposter. You got lucky, they're going to find out. But here's the truth. Self-doubt isn't a reflection of who you are. It's a residue from who you were. It's the leftovers of environments that didn't see your potential, so they trained you to not see it either. But what the Stoics knew and lived was this. You can't build a present self and a past lie. So you question it, not with arrogance, but with evidence. Ask, is this doubt based on fact or just old fear in disguise? And most of the time, it's just fear, wrapped in the language of reason, disguised as logic, masquerading as humility. But real humility isn't self-erasure, it's self-honesty. And honesty says, I've grown, I've changed, I no longer fit the story that says I'm not enough. So delete it, line by line, not with rage, but with respect for who you are now, for what you've built, for how far you've come even when no one noticed. Imposter syndrome isn't a sign you don't belong. It's a sign you're growing faster than your inner script. So update the story. Let it catch up to the strength you've already become. True confidence isn't being accepted. It's not needing to be. Everyone wants to belong, to be seen, to be known, to be chosen, and there's nothing wrong with that. Until you trade yourself for it, until you shapeshift, shrink, stay silent just to stay included, until belonging becomes a cage. Because here's what the Stoics knew. True belonging isn't given, it's claimed. Not through applause, not through fitting in, but through standing still when everything around you wants you to bend. They didn't ask, where do I fit? They asked, what do I stand for? Because when you stand for something, you belong everywhere you are, even in solitude, even in opposition, even when no one understands. That's not isolation, that's integrity. That's the kind of self-belief that doesn't need permission. It doesn't need a seat at every table. It brings its own table wherever it walks. And when you walk like that, people notice, not because you're loud, but because you're grounded. Not because you're perfect, but because you're whole. So stop asking the world to validate who you are. Start asking yourself, am I living in a way that respects my own center? Because confidence doesn't bloom in the spotlight. It grows in the dark, in the choices no one sees, in the integrity no one claps for, in the inner voice that whispers, "You don't need to be accepted here." You've already accepted yourself. Lesson 8. The Stoic practice of reframing reality. The world doesn't change. The way you see it does. Life hits everyone. Good people, disciplined people, people who did everything right. The Stoics never promised ease. They promised perspective, because the truth is, the world isn't the enemy, your interpretation is. It's not the delay that hurts, it's the story you tell yourself about it. It's not the breakup that breaks you, it's what you decide it means. It's not failure that destroys your spirit, it's the narrative you attach to it. This is where Stoicism shines, not in controlling the storm, but in rewriting the weather report. Marcus Aurelius wrote in war, in sickness, in betrayal, but his words read like peace. Why? Because he refused to let pain define his lens. That's the power of reframing, not denial, not delusion. Clarity. The discipline to ask, what else could this mean? What if this delay is protection? What if this silence is space to realign? What if this ending isn't punishment, but permission to rebuild with intention? You don't change your life by changing what happens. You change it by changing what you make of it. This isn't mindset hype. This is mental ownership. To reframe is to reclaim. It's to take the raw data of life, the pain, the friction, the silence, and choose meaning that strengthens you. Not because it's easy, but because it's yours. And once you own your lens, you own your world. Don't react, reframe, then respond. Everything in life is neutral until you name it. An event isn't good or bad, it just is. It's your lens, your thoughts, your conditioning, your mood that decides what it means. And most of us, we decide too fast. Something goes wrong, we spiral, we assume the worst, we predict the end. But what if we slowed down? What if the moment something stings, you don't react? You reframe, not with toxic positivity, but with honest possibility. The Stoics trained this. They didn't say, feel nothing. They said, pause, recognize, rewrite. Because in the gap between reaction and response, you reclaim yourself. Let's be clear. Reframing is not a mental trick. It's not pretending things are fine. It's not putting a smile on a wound that needs healing, and it's a practice. One where you say, this might not be what I wanted, but I get to decide what it becomes. And maybe the delay teaches patience. Maybe the silence sharpens listening. Maybe the failure reveals misalignment. You don't have to like the pain to learn from it. You just have to stop letting it write your entire story. Reframing is an act of courage, because it means you're willing to re-enter the moment with fresh eyes, eyes that aren't bitter or scared or trying to protect an old identity, but eyes that ask, how can this serve the strongest version of me? And sometimes that question changes everything, because when you stop reacting and start reframing, you don't just shift the moment, you shift who you become inside it. Ask better questions, get a better life. The quality of your life is shaped by the questions you ask yourself every day, every moment, especially in the heat. Most people ask, why me? What's wrong with them? How do I fix this fast? But the Stoics, they asked different questions, questions that didn't just solve the moment, they strengthened the self. Here are 5 Stoic questions that reframe any moment. Is this within my control? Because if it's not, you release it, not out of apathy, but alignment. 2. What's the wise response here? Not the loud one, not the petty one, not the first one that rises, but the one that keeps your integrity intact. 3. If I were who I want to become, how would I respond right now? This one is everything, because it shifts you from emotion to evolution. What if this isn't a problem, but a path? What if this isn't punishment but preparation? What if this is exactly what was needed to forge the next level of you? Will this still matter in 10 years? To most of what breaks our peace doesn't even make it past tomorrow, but we hand over our energy like the moment is everything. These questions pull you out of that loop. They're not magic, they're mirrors. They don't erase the situation. They reveal who you get to be inside it. And when you ask better questions, you create better responses, not because life got easier, but because your mind got stronger. So next time things shake, don't react. Pause, ask, rewrite. That's the Stoic way. That's how you take your power back. You don't need a life coach. You need 10 seconds of silence. You don't need another self-help book. You don't need more hacks, more quotes, or another motivational morning. You need something simple, something you can use in real time, in real life, when it actually hurts. This is that thing. The 10-second Stoic reset. Here's how it works. When something hits, pause for 10 seconds. No scroll, no reply, no escape, just sit with the moment. Inhale deep, exhale slower, ask. Is this within my control? What meaning am I giving this? What would my wisest self do? Let the answers rise, not from panic, but from practice. Then you choose from center, not from chaos. That's the reset. It's not a magic pill, it's a micro move. One that teaches your nervous system that not everything urgent deserves a reaction. It builds space, and inside that space, you make better moves, stronger moves, moves that align with the you you're becoming. 10 seconds to own the moment. 10 seconds to not lose yourself. 10 seconds to remember, calm is always an option. This is what the Stoics trained, not to never feel, but to never be owned by what they feel. You don't need a life coach, you need a system to come home to yourself. And sometimes, 10 seconds is more than enough. Your power is not in reaction, it's in reinterpretation. Life will write moments for you, accidents, heartbreaks, detours you didn't ask for. But here's the truth. Life writes the events. You write the meaning, and that makes you more powerful than you think, because you're not the character waiting to be rescued. You read not the victim of every chapter you didn't choose. You're the author, not of what happened, but of what it becomes. Most people never claim that pen. They stay stuck in blame. They reread their pain. They underline their wounds and call it personality. But the Stoics, they wrote forward. They didn't deny what hurt, they just refused to let it be the last sentence. They reframed betrayal as resilience. They reframed silence as space for wisdom. They reframed endings as honest beginnings. Because if you don't write the meaning, someone else will, and they'll write you small, they'll write you passive, they'll write you like you never had a choice, but you do. In every moment, you get to decide. What story am I telling myself right now? And is that story building me or burying me? If it's the second one, rewrite, not for anyone else, not for ego, but for peace. Because peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of ownership. You aren't what happened. To you, you are what you doweth what happened. And the story you write next, that's where your freedom lives. Lesson 9. The Stoic cure for fear. Fear isn't the enemy. Avoidance is. Fear itself isn't the problem. It's natural, it's ancient, it's part of what kept us alive when survival meant running from lions. But today, most fear doesn't come from danger. It comes from imagination, from stories we tell ourselves, from futures we haven't lived, from assumptions we've never questioned. And instead of facing fear, we avoid, and that is where suffering grows. The Stoics weren't fearless, they were fear-facing. They knew the more you avoid, the more it owns you. Avoid the conversation, It festers. Avoid the truth. It grows teeth. Avoid the mirror. You never get to meet the person you're avoiding. So the Stoic cure for fear wasn't to numb it. It was to name it, to look it in the face, to hold it in the light, to walk toward it until it shrinks. Because fear, left unexamined, becomes a cage. But fear, faced with clarity, becomes a compass. Ask, what exactly am I afraid of? Is it the rejection, the failure, the silence? Then ask, what would happen if I faced it anyway? Not in theory, in action. One small act toward what scares you breaks the loop, and once the loop is broken, fear loses its shape. The Stoics didn't seek comfort. They sought courage, and courage isn't loud. It's quiet repetition. It's showing up. It's choosing honesty when lying would feel safer. It's saying, I feel the fear, I see it, and I walk anyway. Because if you want real peace, you don't escape fear. You meet it with stillness. You don't overcome fear all at once. You walk through it step by step. Fear doesn't leave because you understand it. It leaves because you move through it. Not in giant leaps, not in dramatic moments, but in small, consistent acts of courage. The Stoics didn't wait for fear to vanish. They acted anyway because they knew courage isn't a mood, it's a muscle. And muscles grow through repetition. That's why courage has to be practiced daily, quietly, deliberately. You send the message you've been avoiding. You say the thing that shakes your voice. You tell the truth even when it's inconvenient, not because you're fearless, but because you're done letting fear decide your path. That shift from frozen to forward is where power begins. And it doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like breathing deeper after holding your breath for too long. The Stoics trained for this. Not to erase fear, but to become so familiar with it that it no longer had leverage. So what if courage wasn't something you wait for? What if it's something you schedule? One act a day. That conversation, that choice, that boundary, that one thing you've been delaying, do it today, even imperfectly, especially imperfectly. Because courage doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, and every time you show up in spite of fear, you prove to yourself that you're stronger than it. So don't aim to conquer fear. Just commit one step a day, and by the time you look back, fear won't even know where you went. Fear fades when you show up. Doubt fades when you act. Fear grows in inactivity. The longer you wait, the louder it gets. The more you analyze, the more it multiplies. Because fear doesn't feed on truth, it feeds on delay, on imagining all the ways it could go wrong, on rehearsing pain before it even happens, on building worst-case stories in rooms that haven't opened yet. But the Stoics knew this. Movement kills fear. Not because fear disappears, but because it no longer leads. You show up, you make the call, you take the first step, and suddenly the beast shrinks, not because it was fake, but because it was inflated by your hesitation. The longer you wait, the bigger it becomes. The sooner you move, the smaller it gets. This is why overthinking isn't preparation. It's procrastination in disguise. You're not planning, you're postponing. You're not gaining clarity, you're collecting distractions. And fear loves distraction, because it keeps you just busy enough to avoid your own life. But every time you act, you interrupt the pattern, and the pattern is the prison. So break it. Send the message. Say the thing. Show up scared. Let fear come with you, but don't let it drive. And the moment you move, you'll feel it. That shift, that breath, that tiny piece of your turning. Not because the fear vanished, but because you didn't. You didn't back down. You didn't betray your direction. You didn't wait for perfect. You acted, and in that moment, fear lost its script. Fear never leaves, but it can lose its voice. The goal isn't to become fearless. That's not strength. That's denial. The Stoics never said, you won't feel fear. They said, you don't have to follow it. Indeed, you can hear it, but not obey it. You can feel it and still walk forward. because fear only controls you when you think it has something important to say. But what if fear was just background noise? What if it's like static on a radio, always buzzing, always present, but never quite clear? You stop tuning into it, you stop turning the volume up, you stop mistaking its noise for truth, and in that space, clarity rises because fear screams, but truth speaks softly, and when you create distance between fear and action, you finally hear what's real. Fear doesn't leave, it just gets quieter. It fades into the background as you keep showing up. It stops leading when you stop chasing safety. It loses power when you stop needing certainty before you move. And the beautiful part is, you don't have to fight it. Just live anyway. Build, speak, create, love, lead. Let fear be there, let it chatter, let it doubt you, but don't let it drive. You've heard fear before, and you're still here, still breathing, still building. So let fear ride in the back seat. But you hold the wheel. You don't become brave. You remember that you already are. Courage isn't something you build, it's something you return to. You had it before the world told you to play small, before they laughed, before they left, before you started thinking you had to earn your worth. It was there when you spoke your truth and didn't care how it landed. It was there when you tried, failed, and got back up before you knew what failure even meant. You were born brave, but life teaches us to forget. It replaces instinct with image, curiosity with compliance, and slowly you trade your voice for their approval. But that flame, it never dies. It flickers, it hides, it waits, not for permission, not for applause, just for you to come back. That's what Stoicism offers, not some grand, dramatic transformation, but a quiet return to who you were, before fear grew louder than your truth. So the next time fear rises, don't try to fight it, just remember. Remember how many times you've walked through storms. Remember how many no's you turned into next steps. Remember that courage has never been the absence of fear. It's been the decision to keep moving anyway, even when your hands shake, even when the path is unclear, even when you're the only one who sees it. That decision, repeated, is how you reclaim your center. You don't need to find courage. You need to stop forgetting that it's yours, because the real power isn't in never doubting. It's in knowing exactly who you are when doubt comes knocking and saying back, I remember who I am now, and I'm still walking. And Lesson 10, the Stoic art of letting go. You can't carry everything and expect peace. You're tired, not because you're weak, but because you're carrying too much old guilt, unfinished conversations, silent expectations no one asked you to hold. You carry what they said, what they didn't say, what never got resolved, and slowly, you mistake the weight for your identity. The Stoics knew this trap. They didn't just preach detachment, they practiced release, because holding on doesn't always make you strong. Sometimes it just makes you stuck, and what if strength wasn't in the grip, but in the letting go? What if real peace isn't something you find, but something you return to once your hands are empty? Ask yourself, what am I still carrying that's already gone? Is it the version of you that didn't know better, the friend who stopped showing up, the story that was never yours but still narrates your worth? Let it go, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Because if it's no longer growing you, it's burying you, and no amount of clinging will turn dead weight into new life. The Stoic art of letting go isn't cold, it's clear. It's saying, I release this so I can return to what's true. And that truth is simple. You're not meant to carry everything. You're meant to move, to breathe, to travel light. So make space, not just in your hands, but in your mind, because the peace you're searching for, it's waiting on the other side of letting go. Undate. If it's heavy, it's probably not yours anymore. Some things are heavy because they're no longer yours to carry. That guilt already paid for. that relationship already gone, that version of you that keeps haunting your thoughts already outdated. But we keep holding on because letting go feels like giving up. But here's what the Stoics practiced. You don't drop what matters, you drop what's done. Because not everything unfinished needs closure. Some things just need to be released without one last word, without one final explanation. Because peace doesn't come when it's all tied up in a bow. It comes when you decide that your energy is worth more than your ego. Letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The wisdom to know what no longer belongs in your life, and the courage to drop it without ceremony. Ask, if this is costing me peace, why am I still paying? Because holding on doesn't keep it alive. It just keeps you anchored to a past that no longer fits. You don't owe the pain another explanation. You don't owe the past another version of you trying to make it make sense. You owe yourself lightness, and the longer you delay, the heavier it gets. The more it rots, the more it seeps into things that still have value. So let it go, quietly, deliberately, without needing to be understood. Let it fall. Let it be over. Let it drift away like something that never really belonged, because some endings aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be accepted, and once you do that, you don't just drop the weight, you lift the self. Letting go isn't forgetting, it's releasing what was never real. Sometimes what you're grieving isn't what happened, it's what could have happened. Should have happened, might have happened if life had gone differently. You're mourning a timeline, not a truth, an imagined future you built in your head, a version of life that never existed, but still breaks your heart to lose. That's the trap. We don't just lose people, we lose plans. We lose the picture of how we thought it would all unfold, and in that picture, we were finally okay, finally seen, finally enough. So when it doesn't happen, we cling not to what was, but to what never was. The Stoics saw through this illusion. They knew expectation is a contract you write with reality without its signature. And when that contract breaks, we blame the world. But really, we were never promised that version of the story. So what do? We release it, not to forget, but to refocus. Because life isn't lived in the timeline you built, it's lived in the one you're standing in. And every second you spend grieving an imagined future is a second you miss the one that's still unfolding, right here. You can't heal in a timeline that doesn't exist, so let it go. Let the what if, let the maybe, let the should have by now. They were never yours to carry. They were never truth, just possibility dressed as promise. And once you drop them, you stop chasing ghosts and start moving with what's real. Letting go doesn't mean you lost. It means you chose peace. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up, it's coming home to yourself. You didn't lose. You chose. You chose peace over noise, clarity over chaos, self-respect over forced connection. But it doesn't always feel like that because the world calls detachment a failure. They say if you let go, you gave up. If you stopped trying, you weren't serious. If you don't fight for it, you didn't care. But the Stoics knew better. They didn't cling, they calibrated. Because detachment isn't defeat, it's direction. It's knowing when the energy costs more than the outcome. When the effort becomes survival, not growth. When the door won't open, no matter how many times you twist the handle. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. And if peace costs you, someone who never saw your worth, it's not peace that's too expensive, it's their presence. You're not cold, you're clear, you're not distant, you're discerning, and letting go isn't about bitterness. It's about boundaries, it's about knowing where your path ends and someone else's begins, and having the strength to stop crossing bridges that only collapse under you. So walk away, not with hate, but with honor, not with ego, but with elevation. You're not meant to carry everything. You're meant to continue, and when you let go, you don't fall apart. You fall back into alignment. If your hands are full of what's gone, how will you receive what's next? Something can be over and still take up space, not in the room, but in your mind, your habits, your heart. A conversation that's done still echoes in how you speak. A chapter you closed still shapes how you open to new ones. And the weight, it builds silently, not because it's heavy, but because you never put it down. We think letting go means forgetting, moving on, acting like it didn't matter, but that's not true. Letting go means you stop carrying what no longer feeds you, and when you do, something else happens. You make space for better, for truth, for now, because no matter how strong your grip, you can't hold new life if your hands are full of ghosts. The Stoics knew peace isn't about adding more, it's about subtracting what no longer aligns. So if you feel stuck, check your hands. What are you still gripping? What are you still proving? What are you still hoping will return just so you don't have to feel the absence? Let it fall, let it land, and trust. If it's meant for you, it won't need to be held that hard. The right things arrive soft, quiet, aligned, but only when there's room. So make room. Clear the noise, the story, the shape that no longer fits your soul. And when you do, what's true will find you, not because you chased it, but because you were finally still enough to receive.